Hello everybody and welcome. It's Hugh here at Loxon and I'm here today with our 6th webinar in our Foundation series videos. Now, we have already looked at an introduction to Loxon, an introduction to config, introduction to extensions, how to add them, how to replace them, how to pair peripheral devices. We've looked at lighting. Yesterday we looked at heating, and today's topic follows for me very, very closely on from our heating topic of yesterday, and that is the topic of shading. Now, shading for me is a very, very critical and important part of what Loxon can do and how we really, really fit that tagline, create automation. Shading for me is something that's very, very often overlooked in the building of new buildings, especially of new domestic properties. So for me, whenever I speak to a self-builder who's building themselves a lovely new house or they're doing a lovely renovation of a property, they're always looking to make that property as well insulated and as close to passive standards as they can. Loads of people don't bother with the certification, but loads of people aim to have their building close to passive standards. That means that they have a building that's really well insulated, keeps the heat in, they don't have to worry about wasting loads and loads of money on electricity and gas to heat the house up. Beautiful, lovely homes to live in. In addition to that, it's become a trend over the last decade or so to have really, really big, massive openings of glass in buildings. That's so that we get all of that lovely sunshine in, we get to look out across a beautiful expanse of woodland or whatever our house overlooks at, and it's lovely. But there is one problem with all of this. One thing that is very, very commonly overlooked, and it's overlooked by architects, it's overlooked by structural engineers, it's overlooked commonly in the overall process of building these buildings, and that is solar gain. Now, the solar constant, so at the equator, Sahara Desert-ish, 90-degree angle to the sun, when the sun is out and shining down at the equator, we are generating from that sun around 1,300 watts of energy per square meter. That is a lot of energy. In the UK, even in the middle of winter, we can be on a sunny winter's day at about 500 watts per square meter of energy. Yesterday, for example, it was a glorious day here. We were probably at around 650, 700 watts per square meter. Now, if you think that you've got that lovely, massive, great big slider that's 6 meters long by 2 meters high, that's a lot of square meters in your house that's getting solar rays on it. That's potentially the addition of several extra heaters in that room, heating that room up. Now, in an old house that's leaky as anything, that really doesn't matter because all of that energy is going to go straight out as quickly as it comes in. But in a house that is well insulated, that heat has nowhere to go and that room is going to overheat. So with Loxon, with shading, of course, we have the ability to manually control it via a switch or via an app, but we also have the ability to automate it. Now, many companies that make motorized shading are going to tell you that they can automate and do sunshine and solar gain based shading. And they're not lying, they can. But they only look at one factor. They look at how much solar irradiation there is, so how many watts per square meter of energy the sun is creating, and they shade purely based on that. And what that could lead to is I could have this room here that is actually freezing cold because part of the benefit of a well-insulated house is it tries not to let heat in as well. So I could be freezing cold in this room, but because it's a beautiful sunny day, my shading may be active to block the sun out, and that is completely counterintuitive because I would want to use that sunshine to heat this room up. And this is where Loxon comes in brilliantly. And so what we do is we actually integrate in with the heating and cooling system within the room to decide what to do with shading. And so this is going to be our agenda for today. We're going to look at the products that we have to control and automate shading. We're going to look at the function blocks for shading, and then we're going to look at the parameters. So before we get started with shading, let's have a quick recap on yesterday and our heating webinar. So this slide here, I didn't show you this yesterday. This very, very nicely shows you what our intelligent room controller does with regards to shading. So what we have, for anyone that paid close attention to the parameters yesterday, TC is our comfort temperature for heating and cooling. So TC is the temperature that we want to be at for heating and cooling. And TD was that offset. Remember I said that there was that tolerance up and down, above and below our comfort temperature where it could happily sit in. And so what's happening here is in the morning, this dashed line here is when our schedule would begin. So this is 7 in the morning when we say we want it to be at comfort temperature. And so Loxon will have learnt that it needs to start heating up about here to get the heat up so that it hits comfort on time when our schedule starts. Now then what's going to happen is Loxon Heating is going to try and maintain this comfort temperature. But of course there may be other factors at play that affect the temperature of the room that Loxon cannot control, such as the sun. So the sun could now come out because it's got, let's say, late morning, sun's out, and it's starting to heat this room up, even though the valve actuators are closed and the radiators are not pumping out heat. So sun is heating the room up. We then hit this point here, which is our upper tolerance. And when we hit this upper tolerance, as you can see, this number 3 comes into play. This is our shading. So now that this room has gone that tolerance above our comfort temperature, our shading is coming into operation to then try and passively cool the room down through shading. If we also have active cooling in the room, then after a period of 30 minutes, it switches to cooling mode, and then it will bring on something like aircon to try and forcibly cool that room down. But this is essentially our shading playing into our heating and cooling system to act as a heating or cooling source. So now that we've covered that lovely, pretty graph there, let's look at the products for shading. And this is, again, a range of the products we have available for shading. As always, Mini Server, brains of the system. This little thing here, that is an Internorm extension. So Internorm are a manufacturer of high-end windows and doors. And part of their range is called the iTech range. And they have a range of windows called iTech windows with iTech shading. And they actually have a solar-powered blind integrated into the panes of glass. Now that is a wireless blind that we can control through our Internorm extension. So if you're ever doing a project where Internorm has been specified, talk to the customer about iTech and specify the Internorm extension. Other than that, we have many, many ways that we could potentially control shading solutions. So if we're talking about the blinds themselves, if they're wireless blinds, we probably need some form of integration box. So if they're, for instance, Somfy RTS, we'd probably need some form of integration box that we could speak to either through clean contact, so through relays, or through a technology like RS485. Now, the ability to get relays from Loxon, we have loads of places. You can get potential free, volt-free relays from the Mini Server, the extension, the relay extension. You can also get volt-free relays through the Nano 2 relay tree, which I'll come on to in a second. If you have a blind that is a mains powered blind, so switched lives, then you could use the shading actuator or the Nano IO or any of the other relays we have available. So there are loads and loads of different ways you can control these motors. The easiest type of motor, or rather the best type of motor for us to control, is a motor where you're using relays for up and down. So either a mains directional motor where one live sends it up and another live sends it down, or if it is a DC motor, so like let's say a silent gliss motor, either one that's reverse polarity, so you switch the positive and the negative to change the direction it moves, or one that has 2 clean contacts for up and down. The easiest type of blinds for us to control, because then we get very, very granular levels of control. Other blind systems where we have to use an integration box to speak to the blinds, they will work, but we may not get that really granular level of control on them. And so these would be our methods of physically controlling the blinds. In addition to that, we have all of these peripherals, which are going to be used in tandem with our shading. So our touch and touch pure, as we've seen earlier in the series, left-hand side is for shading control. Top left shades up, bottom left shades down. We've also got on here room comfort sensors. That's because that gives us temperature readings. We can also get temperature from the touch and the touch pure as well, because we know that automated shading should fit in with our room climate. And then the final product on this page is the weather station. The weather station for me is so important when it comes to automated shading, because that is the thing that is giving you real life data on, is it sunny? Is the wind blowing? What is the outside temperature? And all of these can come into effect with shading solutions, because what's the point in shading when it's not sunny? Weather station gives us that data. Now, my two favorite products for controlling blind motors or shading motors are the Nano 2 Relay Tree and the Shading Actuator Air. I'll take off screen sharing in a second so that I'll show them to you in full screen. But the reason that these are my two favorite products is, of course, part of making this all work well is going to be telling Loxon how long it takes for a blind to go down and how long it takes for a blind to go up. Now, using most of the relay options we have available in Loxon or RS485 with an integration box, that would mean for every single blind manually setting an up and a down drive time. Now, this can be very, very time consuming, especially in large buildings. The Shading Actuator Air and the Nano 2 Relay Tree have current sensing built in. So when you use them as your shading options, they will automatically set the drive times for you, so you don't need to worry about it. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing for a second so that I can show you these products in full screen. So firstly, this is the Shading Actuator Air. So what we have, these connectors on either side, these are called Hirschmann connectors. Now, if, like me, you had never heard of that before this product got released, don't worry, I hadn't either. But it turns out that Hirschmann is actually an industry standard for blind motors. Most blind motors that are mains directionally controlled, so two lives, a live up and a live down, will actually come out of the factory with a Hirschmann on it. So just get them not to snip them off for you. This is the best possible option when you're doing external shading, because the blind will probably have a Hirschmann connector already done in the motor housing, and you just need to slot that up in place. So this is two 5-amp relays, but they are mains voltage relays. So on the one side, you provide your mains feed in, and on the other side, you've got neutral and then live up, live down. So two live relays, mains 230 volts live. Just really emphasize that. Current sensing built in. The other great product for shading is the Nano 2 Relay Tree. So the shading actuator is an air product. This is a tree product. So on the bottom here, we've got our tree connections. So 24 volt DC power, tree comms. And then we've got 3 cores that come out of it. The middle core is a common. So these are volt-free relays. Whatever we put on the common gets sent out to the 2 relays. And then we've got 2 relays, each relay rated to 5 amps at 230 volts. For me, this is a perfect relay option. It's great for shading because it's got current sensing. And as you can see by the profile, it is tiny. If you're sticking a local isolator next to each blind motor with a deep enough back box, that could happily sit in the back box and you'd never see it. But also those relays could be used for anything. So you could use them for heating controls, for a bathroom extract fan. It's just a great all-round product to give you relays where you need them. Of course, you could cable all of your blinds back to the mini server and use relays on the mini server, but that means a cable back from each blind, which can be very time consuming and lots of labor, lots of cable pulling. So these would be my 2 preferred products: Shading Actuator Air, Nano 2 Relay Tree. Automatic blinds is going to be the main function block that we are going to be using through this video. This is the function block where we input our touch, where we input our contacts, and where we set our parameters for what needs to happen. And then we also have an overview block for shading, where you can tie multiple blinds from different parts of the house together to provide one single place that you can manage them from, either in the user interface or through custom logic. And then before we finish the slideshow and we go on to the last few slides, let's actually get cracking on config. So let's take a look at this in config. And so this is the config file that I've been working on this entire series. Hopefully you'll recognize it. I've got my bedroom and my kitchen in there that we looked at previously. We now need to add some shading. So I'm going to add some shading on the kitchen, because I very conveniently made that door contact yesterday's video, our patio doors. So on the kitchen page, we need to add the function block for shading. Now, we actually have two function blocks for shading with very similar names. So just if you've been wondering throughout this video why I'm not looking through this big long list of function blocks and I can search for it instead, you can press F5 and that opens up this search bar here. And from this search bar, you can then type in your specific search term for a function block. And so we have two for blinds. We have automatic blinds and automatic blinds integrated. So you can see the two there. They are almost identical. The difference between them is automatic blinds is designed for when you are using relays from something like the mini server or the relay extension or the extension to control your shading. And so it gives you your up and your down relay on the outputs of the block. If you're using a shading actuator or a Nano 2 relay tree, you use the integrated block. And as you'll see, there are no outputs because you pair the device directly within the block. So I'm actually just going to drop both of these onto the page for you so that you can see the difference between them. So I'm going to drop just both of these on here, and we'll end up with only one at the end of our config, but just so that you can see the difference. So, sorry, I told a lie. Automatic blinds integrated, is for when you have internorm blinds. So when you have internorm blinds or our own Geiger motors, that's where you use the integrated block. And then you pair the iTech blind in here. So we're actually just going to be using the automatic blinds block. So if I was to use this with a Nano 2 relay tree, I would have myself a Nano 2 relay tree, which is just here. Installation place could be patio blinds. The room would obviously be the kitchen. And you can set an application for it. Is it being used for universal relays or is it being used for blinds? So it would be used for blinds. I would then apply that. Once I've done that, I could click pair device here on the blinds block and choose that relay, that Nano 2 relay. I could then press accept, and you can see that there is now a device paired in there. And you can see that the outputs disappear because I don't need to manually set up and down. It's done automatically through the Nano 2 relay. Don't know if you can just about see, there's actually a diagram on there that tells you which way is up and which way is down on the relays. Then other things I'm going to need to worry about. Firstly, I'm going to need a touch switch so that I can control these manually. So I would need to take my T5. So here's my touch tree in my demo case, the one that I've been using throughout this entire series. Drag out the T5. And you'll see the big green plus appears on automatic blind. So if I drop that there, the T5 goes onto the T5 input. Now, I've mentioned this once or twice, I think already, but just to re-emphasize, you do not have to manually specify each of the inputs on the touch and what they do on certain function blocks like a lighting controller and a blinds controller. Because we've got that T5 input, and we've assigned a T5 to it, that's automatically going to set only the left-hand buttons to do the correct things on the blinds. It knows what to do with it already. So that would be our T5 to do our up and our down. In addition, we can also link door and window contacts to our blinds. So if you click the little grey plus on the blinds block, it will open up all of the available inputs and parameters for this block. And there are a few on here. There is ST, and a single pulse stops movement of the blinds and blocks any further operation. And we also have SP, which is a safety shutdown, which moves the blinds to a specific position. So I would always personally, if I've got blinds, especially if they're on somewhere like a patio door, I would take that ST input, I would take my door window contact, drag it out, stick it on ST, and remember to invert it. The reason I would do that is that now ensures that if I open the patio doors, that my blinds will not move, either through the app or through the switch or automatically. The reason for that is if those patio doors were to, let's say, open inwards and these were internal blinds, then that could be a very expensive mistake if I didn't have a door contact there, because an automatic period could trigger, or I could not realize and be in another room and crumple my lovely Venetian blinds against open patio doors. So just by being able to put a door contact or a window contact in there can prevent that from happening. And so those would be the appropriate inputs to this block. If I just go ahead and save that in now, and then when that is saved in, open up the web interface for us. So here we have the web interface. Under the room of kitchen, you can see now that I've got my shading, my automatic blinds, you can see it's already in there. And already, if I go and press bottom left on this switch, there we go. Blinds are currently moving down. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Blinds are 11% down, slats are vertical. So it's telling me not only the position of the blinds, but the slat position. Now that's all well and good, but there are two problems here for me. The first problem is that this blind is taking a very, very long time to go down. This would probably be accurate if it was an external blind, but for an internal blind, they tend to move much quicker. And also, this might not be a slatted blind. This might not be a Venetian. This might be a Roman blind. It might be a curtain. And so we want to have the ability to change those things. And as always, we do that in parameters. So if we click on the blinds block in config and take a look at the parameters, the first parameter we have here is type. And type sets what type of blind or shading this is. A Venetian. A 1 is a roller blind. 2 is curtains opening both sides. 3 hasn't been incorrectly translated. They are actually called Schlotter blinds. They're external Venetians. Curtains opening from the left, curtains opening from the right, or awnings. So if I wanted to make these a roller blinds, I could very easily just change that number to 1. However, I'm going to leave it at 0 because 0 are the best kind of blinds to do shading with, because you can then adjust the slats as well. SO, safety shutdown position, that's whether they go completely closed or completely open if I trigger an SP input. We're not using SP, so I'm not going to worry about that. Final position, automatic shading. When it reaches the end of its shading period, does it do nothing? Does it completely open? Does it completely close? Or do the slats go horizontal? There's an element of personal choice into that. TU and TD, these are the drive times up and down. So as I said, if you have a Nano 2 relay tree or a shading actuator air, you don't have to worry about these because the drive times will be set automatically by the current sensing that's built in. If you don't have those products, you need to go with a timer and you need to time the drive times. You'll see that the up drive time is longer than the down drive time. That's because when blinds go down, gravity helps them. So because I don't physically have a Nano 2 relay tree paired, it can't set these automatically. So I could manually set them 20 to go up and 18 to go down. Then we're going to move on to the nitty-gritty parameters, the really in detail ones, the ones that play into shading. So first, we have compass orientation. This parameter here is why the block is still red, because by default, we don't know what orientation these windows are, and so we leave compass orientation as -1. Compass orientation is this window north, south, east, west, or somewhere in between? And it is critically important because a south-facing glass gets more sun than north-facing, but the sun also moves around the sky throughout the day. So we need to say what the compass orientations are. And this works like a protractor. 0 to 360 for 360 degrees. And you can put any number between that. So true south would be 180. Southeast would be between 180 and 270. So I'm going to put 180 there for a south-facing window. We then have DT and DTE. And this is where words for me escape being able to explain this. And this is where the documentation comes in key. So if I press the I on the automatic blinds and look down at the section for D, DT, and DTE, you can see a lovely little picture explaining it. So D would be our compass orientation, and DT and DTE is, are there any obstacles on either side of the window that would prevent the sun from hitting that window? So on this picture example, you can see that it wouldn't start shading until the sun got to here, because if the sun's over here, then there's a wall blocking it from hitting the window anyway. So it's really, really cool that you can go to that granular level of control with these. So that would be DT and DTE. And then for LW and LS, again, take a look at documentation because they are the parameters for slatted blinds of how far the slats are away from each other and what the width of the slats are, which again can allow us to very, very granularly control the slat positions. And then the final parameters to mention would be AT, automatic time. So during automatic shading, how often do these blinds readjust themselves to the sun? By default, every 60 minutes. And then AT1 and AT2 is how long after sunrise does automatic shading start. So by default, 30 minutes after sunrise, automatic shading starts. And then AT2, 30 minutes before sunset, automatic shading stops. And so those are the default parameters. So save that back in. Back over to the web interface. And when that loads up, head over to my kitchen. Here we go. Kitchen, automatic blinds. And if I now trigger them up, you'll be able to see they're moving quite a bit quicker now because I've changed those drive times. So you can see blinds are 60% down, slats are horizontal, but if I now open the contact, look at that, blinds are now locked because patio doors are open. So me opening my contact has locked the blinds in position. Close the contact and I can now trigger the blinds again. Wonderful. So we've just gone to all of that to create manually operated blinds. At the moment, there's no automation playing into these blinds, so let's start creating some. First and foremost, the first thing I want to do is I want to make it so that when I leave the room, so I don't know if this has been mentioned already, but on a touch switch, a double press triggers leaving the room. So a double press on a touch leaves the room. That turns off all the lights, turns off all the music, whatever we might have in that room, but we also want it to trigger the shading back to automatic mode again, because if I've gone in and I've manually adjusted the shades are no longer automatic. So when I leave the room with a double press, I want them to go back to being automatic. And the way that we do that is on the lighting controller outputs, there is an output RQ that if I tick and hover over, tells us outputs a pulse when a double click is detected on any switch inputs. So as soon as any of these switches are double pressed, RQ pulses. And on our automatic blinds block, we have an input called AR. And if I select that, then AR, pulse activates automatic shading. So pulse on double press, pulse activates automatic shading. Perfect. So what I need to do is I need to link the two. I could draw an ugly great line between them, but that looks horrible. Or I could make a reference. That's a little bit neater. But if I want to use this more than once, which I may well end up doing, there's actually a third way that I can link them, and that's through something called a memory flag. If you look at your periphery list, on your periphery list near the top, you've got an option for memory flags. If you select it, and then at the top here at the ribbon, press plus memory flag, and bring your mouse out over the page, you have now got this thing that I can link to RQ there. I can rename this memory flag as leaving room. And now that I've put the output of it onto the page and linked it somewhere, I can now drag this memory flag back out as many times as I like. And there's now essentially an invisible link there between this and this. So as soon as this goes off as well. As soon as this pulses, then this pulses. So that's now our double press activating automatic shading on the blinds. And the final thing for the blinds is getting the blinds to be automatic based on room temperature if the room gets too hot. Now, obviously, this is going to be done through the room controller. So if I go back to our intelligent room controller that we were on yesterday and take a look at the parameters, there is a really, really important parameter here, use sunshine information. If this parameter is ticked, then it will only trigger automatic shading if the room gets too hot if the sun is also out. Because if it's an overcast, cloudy day, we probably don't care about solar shading. So this tick box on the room controller dictates whether the sun is used or not for automatic shading. Now, if this is ticked, you obviously need to be taking sunshine from somewhere. As you'll see here, it's only activated if the system variable sunshine is active. If you take a look in the periphery list, there is system variables. And one of those system variables is sunshine. And as you can see, the source is the weather server, or if I did have a weather station, it would be weather station in there. If you buy one of our weather stations, it comes with a 10-year subscription to our weather service. So that would cover you for the weather station and the weather service. If you do not have either of those, then you can define it by logic and you can put your own brightness sensor or your own whatever into sunshine. But a much better option is just to get the weather station. So use sunshine information is ticked. And as it says here, the output QS. So if I take a look at the intelligent room controller outputs, there is an output on here for QS. In fact, it's already there, QS, output for shading, continuous output. If the option use sunshine information is selected, the sunshine status from system variables is taken into account. In cooling mode, shading becomes active as soon as the comfort temperature or target temperature is exceeded. In heating mode, shading becomes active as soon as the actual temperature is greater than the comfort temperature plus TA max. Brilliant. So that then links our room climate in with our shading. So QS needs to link to an input on the blinds block called AS. So it doesn't go to AR because AR is just looking for a pulse. It goes to AS. AS is a continuous permanent on. So a permanent on signal to trigger shading. So QS links to AS. Save that in. And what we now have is an automated shading system. And so 30 minutes after sunrise every day, automatic shading starts. And then every 60 minutes, or dictated by that parameter for the change time, it will readjust the blinds as needed to based on geo coordinates, based on geolocation, position of the sun in the sky, and the orientation we set for that blind. So if the sun was over there, then only those blinds would be shading if this room got too hot. If the sun is over there, then only those blinds would be shading, and the other blinds in the room would just carry on as they were. If I then override the blinds through the app or through my touch switch, I will have permanently overridden them for that day. It won't start automatic shading again until the following day, unless it gets a pulse on AR, which is why we have linked the double press on the switch on the lighting controller to AR, because that means that when I leave the room and I double press, it then puts the shading back to automatic again. And so to show you all of this in the web interface and to switch my webcam over to my demo case, let's take a look. So kitchen. Here we have it. Automatic blinds are currently open. I can trigger blinds down and they go down. If I press again, it stops them. If I do blinds up, they go up. Wonderful. If I was to open my door contact, then my blinds are locked. And no matter what I press, they will not change position until the door is closed again. If I double tap to leave the room, they go back to automatic mode. Now, they haven't done anything in this situation. That doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that there's nothing that they can do. I could also manually enable automatic mode. And you can see that by manually enabling automatic mode there, they are now doing something. And they are doing something because my room is far too hot. It's 3 degrees hotter than it should be. And so you can see that the blinds are closing, blinds are down, slats are vertical. So it has decided that this south-facing window needs to be completely closed. I think that just about sums it up for shading. Shading for me, so frequently overlooked and has such power to affect the internal climate of a room. You will very frequently see on newly designed houses that they'll put an overhang over lots and lots of big glass. Now, an overhang works great in the summer when the sun is when the sun is high in the sky. But in the winter, when the sun is low, that overhang is almost useless. And as we've said, on a bright, sunny winter's day, you could be getting 500 watts of energy per meter squared into your room, which if you've got very, very large glass faces, can have a big impact. And just by automating the shading, we can make a massive difference to the internal room climate, to use the sun both for heating and for cooling. So camera back on me. Somebody has asked about memory flags. Please, can I show how we see/know the links once you've set them, i.e. see the connection if no connecting line exists. So this memory flag here that I've created, that I've said links to here, the reason that I know that is if I find the memory flag in the periphery list and I click on it, then when I select it, it takes me to the output of the memory flag. So you can see it's now highlighted this output here. If I then expand the memory flag, it shows me all of the pages where it's in use. So if I then click the kitchen page, it then takes me to the input where it's being used. If I was to drag this same memory flag out onto the bedroom as well, you can see that I now have the output. I have the input on the kitchen page and the input on the bedroom page. So by following it in the periphery list, it takes me to everywhere that it is. If I go into live view, you'll see that when I double press, you can just about see it. It's obviously a very, very quick pulse. Ooh. But you can just about see that leaving room pulse when I double press. So you can see it then have an effect and take action. Wonderful. I think that about sums it up for shading. So just in conclusion, back to our slideshow. I just get to the slide that we were at. Shading overview. Sorry, I did forget to show you shading overview. Good job that I have my trusty slideshow to back me up. So a shading overview. If I had a let's say, multiple blinds. So really importantly, every window with every motor should have its own automatic blinds block. Never link multiple motors to the same automatic blinds blocks. Generally not a good idea. So if I did have multiple automatic blinds blocks in multiple rooms, I would probably want a quick and easy place where I could close and open all the blinds in one go. Let's say on my whole house room. And to do that, I use something called an overview. So I have a function block called shading overview. And when I drop that onto a page, it asks me which blinds blocks I want to link to it. So if I choose both of the ones I've added, both in the bedroom and the kitchen, and press OK and save that in, I now have in my web interface once I let that load, give it a few more seconds. Here we go. Under the whole house, I now have this shading overview. If I go into that, it shows me the status of all of the blinds blocks I've connected to it. So I can see that my kitchen is fully closed and in automatic mode, and my bedroom is open. And from one single place, I can close all my blinds, stop all my blinds, and open all my blinds. So I don't have to go into each room and each block individually. I can just do it all from the shading overview. And one other great thing about the shading overview brings us into another feature of the app, which is something called Autopilot Designer. Because me as a homeowner, as a customer, I probably want all of my blinds to close automatically at dusk or at sunset. We could do this through config, or I could do this myself as a user of the system through my app. I click on the magnifying glass here, and then I've got an option for Autopilot Designer. And this is like a slimline version of if this then that logic, event and action. I can click plus here. I can then say that my event is dusk. So if dusk, my action, shading overview, fully close shading overview. So now with Autopilot Designer, I've created an automation that says if it is dusk, it will fully close all the blinds in my house. There we go. And then it also means that I can very, very quickly and easily turn it on and off through the app as well. And then if I now load from my mini server, I've now got an extra page on config called autopilots. And that lists me there the autopilot that I've just created by double clicking on it. So event, pulse for dusk, shading overview, input, complete down. And so that's shading overviews, and that's how you can use them with Autopilot Designer. Brilliant. So just to finish off this webinar, the really, really important things. Link QS from the room controller to AS of the shading controller. So as you can see here, there is actually an AS input on the shading overview. So you could do it to the overview block, or you could do it to each individual automatic blinds block. So really important, QS to AS, to make sure that shading is linked to room climate. Also, make sure that you link leaving room from RQ on the lighting controller to AR on your blinds block as well, so that when you double click to leave a room, it puts that room back into automatic shading. And then these, for me, are the three most important parameters of the automatic blinds block. The type. This affects the user interface. Is it a roller blind? Is it a Venetian? Is it a curtain? Is it an awning? TUTD, the drive times, how long it takes to go up and down. That is automatically set when you're using a shading actuator or Nano 2 relay tree, but also you can automatically set it, especially if you're using relays, say, on the mini server. And finally, compass orientation. Without compass orientation, automatic shading cannot come into play because it doesn't know where the sun is in the sky. It uses geo coordinates, geolocation for that information. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining. As always, config and the Loxon app, I hope you are starting to realize by now just how powerful they are and just what level of control and automation we can create in a system, and how we can really make all of these things sing and dance together rather than acting as independent systems. If you haven't got one already and you are interested in a welcome package, please get into contact with Megan. She can sort that out for you. Other than that, thank you ever so much for joining. I hope you've enjoyed. Please join me again for tomorrow's webinar and for the rest of our series. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.